The dust cloud behind my beaten-up Honda settled as I pulled into the gravel driveway of Grandpa Joe's ranch. 3 months had passed since his funeral, and here I was, finally making the trip from Chicago to this godforsaken corner of Texas. The sprawling property stretched endlessly under the blazing sun, weathered barns, rolling pastures dotted with cattle, and the 2-story farmhouse where my father grew up. I'd expected a warm welcome from my extended family. After all, we were blood. But the moment I stepped out of my car, the tension hit me like a physical wall. Uncle Frank emerged from the main house, his face twisted in disgust. Behind him followed Aunt Martha and my cousins Jake and Sarah, all wearing the same expression of barely concealed hostility. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," Frank sneered, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "The city boy finally decided to show up." My stomach knotted. "Uncle Frank, Don't Uncle Frank me, boy. You think you can waltz in here after ignoring this family for years and expect a red carpet?" Martha crossed her arms. "Your grandfather built this place with his bare hands. We've been keeping it running while you played dress-up in your fancy office." The words stung because they held a grain of truth. I had been distant, caught up in my corporate life, missing holidays and family gatherings. But I was here now, wasn't I? "Where am I supposed to stay?" I asked, gesturing toward my suitcase. Frank's laugh was cold as winter wind. "The barn's got plenty of space. You want to be part of this ranch? You'll start at the bottom like everyone else." As they walked away, leaving me standing alone in the dust, I felt something crinkle in my jacket pocket. The envelope my grandfather's lawyer had given me with strict instructions not to open until I arrived at the ranch. Maybe it was time. The barn smelled of hay, leather, and decades of honest work. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight streaming through gaps in the weathered wood. This would be my home for however long I stayed, a far cry from my downtown Chicago apartment with its floor-to-ceiling windows and marble countertops. I threw my sleeping bag onto a pile of hay bales, trying to ignore the scratching sounds of mice in the walls. Through the open barn doors, I could see the main house where warm light glowed from the windows. The family was probably sitting down to dinner right about now, sharing stories and laughter while I arranged my meager belongings in this makeshift bedroom. My phone buzzed, a text from my ex-girlfriend, Jessica. "How's the family reunion going?" I almost laughed at the irony. Some reunion this was turning out to be. As darkness fell, I could hear them on the front porch. Frank's booming voice carried across the yard as he regaled the others with stories of the good old days when Grandpa Joe was alive. Every now and then, cruel laughter erupted, and I wondered if they were talking about me. The envelope in my pocket seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour. My grandfather's lawyer, Mr. Henderson, had been very specific. "Don't open this until you're at the ranch, son. And when you do, make sure you're alone." I pulled out my phone's flashlight and examined the envelope more closely. It was thick, official-looking, with my name written in Grandpa Joe's familiar scrawl across the front. Below my name, he'd written something else in smaller letters. "For when they show their true colors." A chill ran down my spine despite the warm Texas night. It was almost as if he'd known this would happen, known that his own family would treat his grandson like a stranger, like an unwelcome intruder in his own heritage. Dawn came too early, announced by Frank's fist pounding on the barn door. "Rise and shine, city boy! Cows don't milk themselves!" My body ached from sleeping on hay bales, and my clothes were wrinkled beyond recognition. I stumbled outside to find Frank waiting with a pitchfork and a smirk that made my blood boil. "You'll start with mucking out the horse stalls," he said, clearly enjoying himself. "Then you'll help Jake repair the fence in the south pasture. After that, we'll see if you're worth the food you'll be eating." The work was backbreaking. My soft office hands blistered within the first hour, and my dress shoes, the only footwear I'd brought, were completely ruined by the time I finished the stalls. Jake watched me struggle with obvious amusement, offering no help or guidance. "You know," he said during our lunch break, Grandpa Joe always said this ranch would stay in the family. Real family. People who understand what it means to work the land. The implication was clear. I wasn't real family. I was an outsider, a pretender who'd abandoned his roots for the comfort of city life. But as I worked under the scorching sun, something unexpected happened. Memories began flooding back. Summers spent here as a child, riding horses with Grandpa Joe, learning to rope cattle, sitting on the porch listening to his stories about the old days. This place was in my blood, whether they wanted to acknowledge it or not. That evening, as I collapsed onto my hay bale bed, exhausted and humiliated, I finally pulled out the envelope. My hands trembled as I broke the wax seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper that made my heart stop. It was a deed. And according to the legal document in my shaking hands, I wasn't just a visitor at this ranch. I was the owner. I read the deed 3 times before the words truly sank in. The Lone Star Ranch, all 2,147 acres of it, had been transferred to my name 6 months before Grandpa Joe's death. The document was notarized, witnessed, and completely legal. My mind raced as I tried to process this revelation. While my family had been treating me like an unwelcome burden, assuming they would inherit everything, Grandpa Joe had quietly signed over the entire property to me. The barn where they'd exiled me, mine. The house where they were sleeping comfortably, mine. Every cow, every acre of pasture, every piece of equipment, all of it belonged to me. But why hadn't he told anyone? Why the secrecy? I found my answer in a handwritten letter tucked behind the deed. Grandpa Joe's familiar writing filled 2 pages with words that brought tears to my eyes. My dear grandson, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and my family has shown you exactly who they really are. I've watched them these past years, seen how they circle like vultures, counting my assets and planning their inheritance. They think this ranch owes them something just for being born into the family name. But you, son, you remind me of myself at your age. You went out and made something of yourself. You didn't sit around waiting for handouts. That's why this place belongs to you now. I know they'll treat you poorly when you arrive. I know they'll try to make you feel small and unwelcome. Let them. Let them show their true nature. Then when you're ready, show them this deed and watch their world crumble. My hands shook as I folded the letter. Outside, I could hear Frank's loud voice bragging about the improvements he planned to make to his ranch once the inheritance was settled. If only he knew that the inheritance had already been settled, just not in his favor. The next morning, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just 24 hours earlier. I said nothing about the deed. Instead, I endured another day of backbreaking labor and casual humiliation, all while knowing I could end their charade with a single piece of paper. But Grandpa Joe's letter had been clear. Let them show their true nature. And they were certainly doing that. During lunch, Martha made a point of discussing the ranch's future within earshot of where I sat eating my sandwich alone. "Frank's been talking to a developer about selling the north pasture," she said loudly. "Could bring in enough money to modernize the whole operation. Course, we'll need to wait for the will to be read officially," Frank added. "But we all know how it's going to go. Joe always said blood is thicker than water, and we're the ones who stuck by him all these years." Sarah chimed in with her own cruel observation. "It's funny how some people think they can just show up and claim a piece of something they never worked for." Each word was a dagger aimed directly at me, but I forced myself to remain silent. They had no idea they were discussing selling land that already belonged to me, making plans for a future that would never come to pass. That afternoon, while repairing fence posts under Jake's supervision, I overheard him on a phone call with someone about liquidating assets once the inheritance came through. The casual greed in his voice made my stomach turn. These people weren't just treating me badly. They were actively planning to destroy everything Grandpa Joe had built. They saw the ranch not as a legacy to be preserved, but as a commodity to be exploited. As the sun set on my second day in exile, I realized that Grandpa Joe hadn't just given me property. He'd given me the power to protect his life's work from the very people who should have cherished it most. Rehook. But what happened next would test every ounce of self-control I had left. The third day brought a new level of cruelty that pushed me to my absolute limit. Frank decided I needed to prove my worth by single-handedly moving a massive pile of hay bales from one end of the property to the other, in the middle of the hottest day of the week. "Real ranch hands don't complain about a little sweat," he said, watching me struggle with bales that clearly required two people to move safely. "Maybe this will teach you what real work looks like." By noon, I was dehydrated and exhausted. My hands were raw and bleeding, my back screamed in agony, and I'd barely made a dent in the pile. When I asked for a break to get water, Frank just laughed. "Water's for quitters, city boy. You wanted to be part of this ranch? This is what it takes." That's when I overheard the conversation that changed everything. Martha was talking to someone on her phone near the house, her voice carrying across the yard. "Oh, he'll be gone within the week. Frank's making sure of that. We can't have some outsider thinking he has any claim to this place. Once he gives up and goes back to Chicago, we can get on with selling this dump and splitting the money." The casual malice in her voice hit me like a physical blow. They weren't just being unwelcoming. They were actively trying to drive me away through systematic abuse. And they were planning to sell the ranch that had been Grandpa Joe's pride and joy. I looked down at the deed in my pocket, feeling its weight like a loaded weapon. Every instinct screamed at me to march over there and end this charade immediately. But something held me back. Maybe it was Grandpa Joe's wisdom, or maybe I just wanted to see how far their cruelty would go. Either way, I knew the time for revelation was coming soon. That evening, Frank called a family meeting on the front porch. I wasn't invited, of course, but sound carries far in the open countryside, and I could hear every word from my position in the barn. "We need to discuss the elephant in the room," Frank began, his voice serious for once. "The city boy's been here 3 days, and he's not getting the message. We need to be more direct." "What are you suggesting?" Martha asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. "I'm suggesting we tell him the truth, that he's not welcome here, that he never will be, and that he needs to pack up his fancy car and head back where he came from." Jake's voice joined the conversation. "Dad's right. He's dead weight. Can't do the work, doesn't understand the land, and he's got no real connection to this place. Grandpa Joe might have felt sorry for him, but charity only goes so far. Plus," Sarah added with a laugh that made my skin crawl, "can you imagine him trying to run this place? He'd probably turn it into some kind of organic yoga retreat or something equally ridiculous." Their laughter echoed across the yard, each chuckle a fresh insult. But it was Frank's next words that truly revealed the depth of their deception. "The lawyer's coming tomorrow to read the will officially. Once that's done and we have the paperwork in hand, we can start making real plans. I've already got 3 different buyers interested in various parcels. We could make enough to set us all up for life." My blood ran cold. They were so confident in their inheritance that they'd already begun dismantling Grandpa Joe's legacy before they even legally owned it. The ranch that had been in our family for 3 generations was nothing more than a payday to them. I pulled out the deed one more time, reading it by moonlight. Tomorrow's meeting was going to be very different from what they expected. Mr. Henderson arrived at exactly 10 a.m. in a dust-covered sedan, carrying a leather briefcase that seemed to hold the family's entire future. I watched from the barn as Frank greeted him with the kind of false warmth reserved for people you need something from. "Bill, good to see you again. Sorry about the circumstances, of course, but Joe lived a good long life." The family gathered in the main house's living room, the same room where I'd spent countless childhood hours listening to Grandpa Joe's stories. Through the window, I could see them arranging themselves like vultures around a fresh kill, their faces masks of false solemnity that barely concealed their excitement. I wasn't invited to this gathering either. According to Frank, I was just a visitor and had no business in family matters, if only they knew how wrong they were. Mr. Henderson's voice drifted through the open windows as he began the formal reading. The last will and testament of Joseph William Crawford, dated... His words were mostly legal jargon, but I caught the important parts. Small bequests to various family members. A few thousand here, some jewelry there, token amounts that made them shift impatiently in their seats. Then came the moment they'd all been waiting for. As for the Lone Star Ranch, including all buildings, livestock, equipment, and the 2,847 acres of land, the silence was deafening. I could practically feel their anticipation through the walls. I must inform you that this property was transferred via deed to my grandson, Thomas Michael Crawford, 6 months prior to my death. The ranch is no longer part of this estate. The explosion of voices that followed was immediate and chaotic. Frank's roar of outrage, Martha's shriek of disbelief, Jake and Sarah's confused protests, all blending into a symphony of shock and fury. It was time for me to make my entrance. I walked through the front door without knocking. After all, it was my house now. The family turned toward me with faces ranging from confusion to pure rage. Frank's complexion had gone from red to purple, and Martha looked like she might faint. "What the hell is this about?" Frank snarled, advancing toward me with clenched fists. "What kind of game are you playing?" I pulled the deed from my pocket and handed it to Mr. Henderson, who examined it with professional calm before nodding. "This is indeed the original deed I witnessed 6 months ago. The property legally belongs to Thomas." The silence that followed was broken only by the ticking of Grandpa Joe's old clock on the mantel. I could see their minds racing, trying to process this impossible turn of events. The unwelcome city boy they'd been tormenting for 3 days was actually the owner of everything they'd considered theirs. "This is impossible," Martha whispered. "Joe would never... He wouldn't cut out his own family." "But he didn't cut you out," I said quietly. "He left you money, jewelry, personal items. He just didn't leave you the ranch." Frank's face contorted with fury. "You manipulated him. Somehow you got to him in his final months and convinced him to—" "Frank," Mr. Henderson interrupted firmly, "I can assure you that Joe was of completely sound mind when he made this decision. In fact, he was quite specific about his reasoning. I thought about sharing Grandpa Joe's letter, about revealing how he'd predicted their exact behavior. But some secrets were meant to stay between grandfather and grandson." "You can't do this," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "This ranch has been in our family for generations. You can't just take it away from us." "I'm not taking anything," I replied. "Grandpa Joe gave it to me." "There's a difference." "Why?" The word came from Jake, spoken so quietly I almost didn't hear it. "Why would he choose you over us? We're the ones who stayed. We're the ones who worked this land." For the first time since arriving, I felt a flicker of sympathy for my cousin. Unlike his parents, Jake seemed genuinely hurt rather than just angry. Maybe there was still some real family feeling left in him. "You want to know why?" I asked, looking around the room at their expectant faces. "Because he knew what you'd do with this place. He heard you talking about selling it, about turning his life's work into quick cash." Frank's jaw tightened. "That's business sense. This ranch barely breaks even. It would be smart to destroy everything he built?" I cut him off. "To erase 3 generations of family history for a payday?" "Don't lecture us about family history," Martha spat. "You abandoned this family years ago. You missed birthdays, holidays, even Joe's 80th birthday party. You only showed up for the funeral, and barely even then." Her words stung because they held truth. I had been distant, caught up in my own life and career. But that didn't change what I'd discovered about their true nature over the past 3 days. "You're right," I admitted. "I wasn't here like I should have been." But at least I never saw this place as a commodity to be sold. At least I never treated family like servants. "What's that supposed to mean?" Frank demanded. "It means I've spent 3 days sleeping in a barn, being treated like hired help, listening to you plan the destruction of everything Grandpa Joe loved. And through it all, I could have stopped it with a single piece of paper." The realization dawned on their faces slowly. I'd known. I'd known the entire time, and I'd let them reveal exactly who they really were. "You knew?" Martha's voice was barely a whisper. "You knew this whole time and you let us—" "Let you what? Treat me exactly the way you wanted to treat me?" I stood up, feeling 3 days of suppressed anger finally finding its voice. "Let you show me your true colors? Yes, I let you do that." Frank lunged toward me, but Mr. Henderson stepped between us. "Frank, I'd strongly advise against any physical confrontation. Thomas is well within his rights to have you all removed from the property immediately." The threat hung in the air like smoke. They were trespassers now, squatters on land that belonged to me. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that they seemed unable to process it. "What do you want?" Sarah asked, her voice small and defeated. "Money? Is this some kind of revenge scheme?" "I want you to understand something," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion churning inside me. "Grandpa Joe didn't choose me because I was perfect. He chose me because he knew I'd preserve what he built instead of destroying it for profit." I walked to the window and looked out at the vast expanse of pasture, at the cattle grazing peacefully in the distance, at the weathered barn that had been my home for 3 nights. This ranch isn't just property. It's a legacy. It's the story of our family's struggle and success. And you were ready to sell that story to the highest bidder. Frank's shoulders sagged in defeat. "So what happens now? You kick us out and run this place by yourself?" "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But I know what won't happen. This ranch won't be carved up and sold. It won't be turned into a subdivision or a shopping center. It'll remain what Grandpa Joe intended it to be, a working ranch and a family legacy." The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to drive me away, they'd only proven why I deserved to stay. 6 months have passed since that dramatic day in the living room. The ranch is thriving under my management, though it took time to learn the ropes properly. I hired experienced hands to help with the daily operations while I educated myself about cattle ranching, land management, and the 100 other skills needed to run a successful operation. Frank and Martha moved to town, their relationship with me strained but slowly healing. Jake surprised everyone by asking to stay on as a paid ranch hand. He's proven to be a hard worker when he's not consumed by entitlement, and we've developed a grudging mutual respect. Sarah visits occasionally, usually bringing her children to ride horses and experience the ranch life their great-grandfather loved so much. Those visits give me hope that future generations might understand what this place truly represents. I've kept Grandpa Joe's letter in a frame on the desk in what used to be his office. Sometimes, when the work gets overwhelming or I question whether I made the right decision, I read his words again and remember why he trusted me with his legacy. The barn where I spent those first 3 nights has been converted into a guest house. It's comfortable now with proper insulation and modern amenities, but I've kept some of the original character. Sometimes I sleep there when I want to remember how this all began, with humility, hard work, and the shocking discovery that family isn't always about blood relations. It's about who shows up when it matters, who preserves what's precious, and who understands that some things are worth more than money. The Lone Star Ranch is more than my inheritance now. It's my responsibility, my purpose, and my home. And unlike my relatives, I have no intention of ever selling it. Grandpa Joe knew exactly what he was doing.